I've already delving into the third one as well, finding that it's a very different experience writing the first book versus the second book versus the third book to a trilogy. They all have different challenges, I'm finding, and kind of present different obstacles to overcome, that kind of thing.
You had a map though, right, going forward from the
Yes.
first book, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I had an overarching plan. I didn't have everything exactly figured out. I tend to use a bit of a mishmash of approaches, like combining the kind of Stephen King style free writing approach with more of the Sanderson style outlining and figuring out every detail. So I like to have a loose idea of where everything is going and then kind of let the story fill in the blanks in between.
I want so badly to be able to outline a story. I tried with a novel that I started a few weeks ago. I put a subject line on top and I start
Hmm.
building down from using the snowflake method,
Oh
and
yeah.
I got bored so fast.
Yeah. Well, the snowflake method is super involved. I find anyways that it requires quite a lot of time spent, writing down things that you may or may not necessarily use. I much prefer to kind of flesh that stuff out in my head and think about it while I'm doing other things in life. Kind of save some time that way too.
So you're maintaining the story in the same world, or is the world evolving with the story as well?
Um, it's in the same world, but there is also evolution within the world. And in terms of outlining, like this third book, because there are so many different threads to keep track of and so many um, elements that I want to be able to put a bow on at the very end and say everything was resolved. So this one has required a bit more planning and outlining than the other books. But yes, uh, this second and the third story maintain the same world. In the sequel to Recreant's Vigilance, there are some new characters added. The two main characters, Orin and Clementine, are still present, and their storyline still continues. And they have some incredible experiences. But there are also a couple of new characters as well that kind of help to diversify a bit and create some tension and some suspense in other parts of the world. Um, and the goal, of course, is in the third book to bring all of those characters together and show how all of their, previously kind of parallel or separate storylines sort of intertwine and all impact the plot in a big way.
Do you know how much more story you have to tell?
With this in this series,
Hmm.
so my goal from the beginning has been to make this a trilogy. Um,
Oh, so
yeah,
how is that fitting into your plan now? Or is it still a trilogy, or are you going on beyond that?
yeah, I think it's still a trilogy. I am planning to leave things open at the end, just to leave the opportunity to continue on in that universe, should I desire to, or should there be demand for that kind of thing. But things are pretty much going to be wrapped up, and a big part of that is I've got a lot of other ideas that I want to explore.
Yeah, I wanted
Um,
to ask you. I mean, do you have ideas for the next series, or do you know what you're going to write next?
Well, I have a couple of different ideas. One of which I first started thinking of as an offshoot. In these books, there are these. So there are multiple worlds within these in the Eternum Chronicles universe, and some of the characters are able to travel between them through waygates or other means, but it's not something that's super common. It's sort of more of a rare occurrence, but they get to explore these alien worlds. And within the universe, there are these beings which are referred to as pilgrims, and no one really knows a ton about them, but they are known to be explorers, and they spend their entire lives cataloging all of the different worlds that are traversable in this universe.
Because that can
Uh,
go on forever, then, huh? I mean, basically,
yeah,
the multiverse is whatever you want to put into it. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and so one of the ideas I was thinking, I wasn't really sure whether this would be a novella or a full novel, is to go to the home world of these these characters and sort of describe how one of them begins their journey and the obstacles and the struggles that they go through in order to become one of these esteemed members of society who goes out and catalogs the universe and all of these different planets. So I've had some ideas around doing an offshoot in that direction. I've also kind of been playing with the idea of doing some lit RPG writing as well.
Explain that, because now I'm thinking about the guy who wrote World War Z,
Oh
wrote
yeah.
some literature around the game Minecraft.
Oh, interesting. I did
Right?
not
And
know
I'm
that.
like, I heard about that. I'm like, oh, I gotta read that. I have yet to, but I want to so badly. And
Hmm.
now I think Will Ferrell is in the movie version of, of the book itself. It just
Wow.
got crazier and crazier. No, you're doing the
That's
right thing in terms of the novella. I talked to had a really interesting conversation with a fantasy guy named Garrett Robinson, and he said the right way to write novellas is to fit it into your world.
hmm
I could write a novella right now and just be a standalone, but that's not the best way to sell the novel or the
right.
story. You want to build between those pieces,
Yeah.
and I respect that. But you
Yep.
haven't written it yet. Have you started the outlining or getting bones
Yeah,
in?
actually, I was thinking about writing it in between book 2 and 3 of the Eternum Chronicles because it does relate, and I was kind of thinking, it would be fun to dive in something different, but I ended up uh, setting it aside for now, and I kind of came to the conclusion that I need to just dive into this third book while everything is fresh in my mind because there's so much to keep track of now that and so many different like loose ends to tie up that I don't want to risk losing that. So um, I am setting that one aside. I think I'm probably going to sit down and work on that after this third book is finished. But there is another novella that I have written that goes along with this series called The Gathering Mask. Um, and it's about 20,000 words, so it's not anything super long, but it follows one of the main characters, Clementine, who ends up on the street and carving out a life on the street as a thief, and she uses her kind of mastery of the technology that's available in this world to build tools and gadgets and stuff like that that help her to become an accomplished kind of underworld thief and then so that takes place in a period of the first book that is kind of there's a bit of a time skip over and so it fills in that blank a little bit. It's kind of a good read for between the first and second books.
I get a sense that you have a really good grasp of the world that you're building.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things, right, where you spend so much time in it and so much time thinking about it that it's it becomes real to 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 the person who's writing it down and who's coming up with this stuff and everything kind of has its place and everything fits in and I'm having a lot of fun working on the third book too because I'm able to really
That's the
fill
best
in a lot
part,
of the blanks.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, having fun doing this thing. I mean, it can be arduous sometimes, and
Hmm.
that's, pushing past that can sometimes be a chore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong. This is an apocalyptic tale where the world is our world, but it's gone, and there's one city left, if I remember
Pretty
correctly.
close. Yeah. It's a dystopian kind of fantasy sci-fi mishmash of a novel. I take elements, my favorite elements of those different genres, and kind of bring them into play. It's not our world per se, although it could be.
Hmm.
And it takes place 1400 years after humanity has discovered the genetic cure for aging. So
Oh, interesting.
the history of that is that there was this wonderful discovery, but what ended up happening is it led to centuries of war. People competing when people aren't dying anymore, they're competing for resources. There you have despots who are essentially immortal, who can rule over people and conquer a land, and they never die. So there are all these different implications that come along with eternal life, quote unquote, that can have really interesting impacts on a world.
They can
So
still be
the
murdered, though, right? I mean, their lives can be ended.
exactly right, correct. And the thing is, when someone is killed, is it considered a greater crime because they're robbed of, let's say, hundreds or even 1,000 or more years of life, as opposed to 30 or 50, uh, you know, the normal? age and lifespans that we're used to now. So there are other implications with that as well. Um, Perhaps would life be considered more valuable if it were to
Doesn't
extend
end.
longer? Yeah, exactly.
Or less valuable for that matter. I mean, if you're never going
Yeah,
to die, and what does death actually mean? I think
right.
death would be more important in that sense. I mean, there'd be more of a
Hmm.
fantasy, if or fear.
Right.
Yeah, man, this is a really interesting question. A
Hmm.
lot of people think we're close, than 1400 years. A lot of people think we're like right around the corner from being able to fix
Hmm.
the aging problem.
Yeah, well, they say that the body begins to deteriorate after age 28, and it's at that point that's actually a tool that coroners use to help determine the death of certain victims. When they're doing an autopsy, is they look at is the body is it still in the generating phase, or is it in the decaying phase? And if so, that helps them to gauge how far the victim would be from age 28.
Man, I would have thought it was 41 because I feel like I'm falling apart.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, they say the brain isn't fully developed until 25.
Yeah,
So
I've heard that too.
so we're good on that front, hopefully.
I've got a fully developed brain, but my
Yep.
body is falling apart.
Exactly.
I remember when I
Yeah.
used to be able to abuse the living crap out of myself, and the
Hmm.
recovery was nothing. But now I run a few miles, and it's like, oh, that hurt.
Oh yeah. Believe me, I completely understand. I'm in the
Ah,
same
man, as
spot.
somebody who flies helicopters too, you have to be aware of aging as well, like the slowing of. I don't know. I mean, how does that work?
Reflexes and vision.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It all has an impact, and in writing these books, that was something that I did a lot of research on as well, and just kind of a curiosity driven as well, just trying to see where is science at right now with this, and where do we see ourselves in the future, and I've watched some really interesting, like there are these Kurzgesagt videos that talk about um, all these different scientific topics, and one of them was discussing aging, and it's framed death as a disease in the same way that we look at cancer or other degenerative diseases that end your life prematurely. And it was just really fascinating to me to think of death in that way, as opposed to
Mhm.
being this sort of eventual, inexorable, natural thing that happens. That
The
it's actually,
inevitability of it.
yeah, yeah, that it's actually something that is a disease, or is something to be cured. And so, I mean, who knows, right? That the entire human experience would be forever changed if we were to ever overcome
Maybe this is
disability.
giving something away, but what is the oldest character you have functioning in your book, in your novels?
So I can't. I hesitate to tell you, but I'll tell you some of the age ranges because I don't want to give anything away. But the antagonist,
Hmm.
the main antagonist for the story, is just over 900 years old.
Wow, that's
And
not Clementine. That's her.
no,
That's the other guy. What's his
no,
name?
no, the antagonist. So the villain
Oh,
of the story. The two main characters are actually quite young. They start out as 17 and 15, and then as the story progresses, 2 years pass, and then they're 19 and 17. So
so
they're
they're
pretty young,
young
but
compared. Yeah,
yes.
that's interesting. They're not even fully developed mentally yet.
Right, exactly. But they do start to experience things that other characters in the story that are only supposed to happen when you're much older.
Well, it
So
also sounds like you're letting these characters kind of be the readers too. These are YA novels, right? More YA-ish.
yeah, and I mean, I think that's kind of where they tend to fit in some regards, but I've heard from a lot of people who have said that, they're not young adults, but they still really enjoyed these books, and that
That
they
is
have
an
a broad
awesome
appeal.
compliment. That
Yeah.
really is. Orson Scott Card said that he wrote a kid's book with
Hmm.
Ender's Game,
Yeah.
but it resonated with adults too, and that's where his success comes from. And then look at J.K. Rowling. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a kid's book, and adults loved it.
Suzanne Collins, The Hunger Games. Yeah, those
Yeah,
those
Hunger
two are
Games is
YA.
another great example. And it's very interesting. I mean, do you think that if you lived to 700 years old or 1400 years old or beyond that point, would you still have the hunger to learn? Would it put the pressure on perfecting this, that, or the other thing? I think it would impact art. You know what I mean? One of the things
Uh-huh.
that artists do is try to get it out because there's an end date.
Yeah, yeah, and if you think that. if you believe that, creativity stems from the different things that you've experienced and absorbed, whether that be other artwork or music or events or things like that, then theoretically you would become more and more enriched and be able to create more and more incredible pieces of art if
Or be
that were the
bored with it
case. So
eventually, right? And I mean,
potentially that too. Yeah, maybe you master it and you're all of a sudden at the Da Vinci level of creating
it's like,
paintings.
okay, I'm
You're
done
like,
with
I'm bored.
that.
Who knows?
No, it
Yeah.
makes it's a fascinating idea
Yeah.
in terms of, I mean, you can live forever, but at the same time, you're throwing yourself in front of danger too,
Right.
because you're fighting. You have enemies, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you have a bad guy that you're trying to
who's
knock down.
never who's never going to die of old age, right? So
Exactly.
how do you stop someone who's so entrenched? They've been alive for centuries, and so it's a challenge, right, for these characters, and the idea is that after this discovery, there were centuries of war that erupted, and so there was some great catastrophic event that destroyed the vast majority of the cities and kingdoms that had existed in this world, and all that is left is New Arcadia, this massive colony that's floating up over the desert sands via electromagnetism, and that's it. That's the last of humanity, and it's ruled over by this oppressive ministry, and so you've got this kind of precious last existing flame of humanity that's in the clutches of this really kind of evil controlling um, dictator, if you will.
So
So
now they fix the genome that makes you old. Does that
mhm.
mean now everybody, no matter what, is going to live until they die of some kind of violence? Or is it being held on to like, oh, you can still die at 70, but I'm going to live?
No, so the storyline kind of, there is explanation of this, and kind of early in the first book it talks about how the scientist who made this discovery recognized early on how it could be taken and abused and only uh, administered to the powerful and the rich, and so there was an insistence that if it's going to be um, shared and given out, that it's going to have to be offered to everyone. Everyone will have to have the choice. And so the majority of people decided, like, yes, that would be fantastic. I don't want to grow old and become feeble and have to sit in a wheelchair and have my teeth fall out. So the majority of people did opt to take it, all of this time ago. And once it was incorporated into the genetics of the majority of humanity, it was passed down through generations. So
Man, have you ever heard of they're Buddhist monks? I don't know what country they hail from, but near the end of their lives, they start preparing themselves to be buried alive.
I
They're
have not heard
basically
that.
oh my god, it's
That's,
horrible to think about. Sometimes it pops into my head,
huh.
and I get, like, anxious thinking about,
Yeah.
these people who are alive, they allow themselves to be entombed in
Oh
these
man.
ceramic, like, vessels that are covered over by earth. But by that point, they basically have poisoned themselves, so they're not really alive. They're stiff and kind of on the way to dying.
Yeah.
But still, man, can you imagine being
I've
shoved into these things? A lot of the cultures on Earth want to die because of the unansweredness,
mhm,
that death provides answers for. What happens after death?
right.
Are there religions in your worlds?
Um, it's very loosely defined. It's not anything that I go into great detail about, just because there's not the opportunities all that much. I mean, the main characters and the folks in New Arcadia, there's not a lot of emphasis on religion in the first place, because the ministry is their religion. The patriarch who's in charge, the antagonist that I mentioned earlier, he is deified in a way. So from a cultural perspective, it's not something that is really accepted or encouraged.
Death,
Religion,
religion.
yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
What about the warrior's way, dying a good death?
I would say yes, in a way there is. So the there is a resistance. There's an underground resistance who very much adopt that type of mentality, um, and they're the way that they fight back is both through subversion as well as through kind of like martial combat and things like
Mhm.
that. So there is an element of it in these kind of underground groups who are there to, you know, to fight back and to help kind of keep the hope alive that one day again humanity will be free.
Free to live basically without dying of old age.
Well, so within New Arcadia, there is something called ascension. And when a citizen reaches 150 years of age, they are obligated to go through this ascension ceremony where nobody really knows exactly what happens, but the, the person's never seen or heard from ever again.
Do you
And
answer
so
that question eventually? Is that a goal, or have you already
mhm,
answered it in the story?
it will be answered clearly in in this last and
Interesting.
final book. Yeah.
So, what came first, the chicken or the egg, the world or the story?
Um, Good question. The world building
The
came
world did.
first. Yeah.
'Cause you definitely have a great world building going on here. It's fascinating. I could talk to you about death. Honestly, is one of my favorite subjects. The
Oh,
idea of death obviously is going to
yeah.
impact all of us, and God, Highlander is one of my favorite movies.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Never the Lynch one, yeah.
it's a fascinating subject. So, um,
And you know what else is really fascinating is, having you on my show. I think it was, you're one of my first guests, but you have been popping up. Every once in a while, I see your book, Arcanium. Am I saying that correctly? Just
uh,
popping up randomly. I mean, you just all of a sudden there's H.G. Chambers. I'm like, wow, how'd that
yeah.
happen? It's so
Yeah.
fascinating, man. I talked to there was a really wonderful woman who lives up on the near Poughkeepsie. Her name
Mhm.
is escaping me, but she mentioned you out of the blue, and I didn't know you guys were connected at all. I was like, I know that guy, and she goes, "You're a
Yeah.
fantastic dude, and your books are wonderful." I mean, you're like starting to branch out a little bit, winning what was it, the Bragg Award,
Yeah.
BRAG.
Yeah, indie brag award, and I've just started entering some more contests. But I appreciate that. Yeah, and I wish I could say that like, oh, it's just that these books are so great that they I don't all I have to do is sit back and they spread and proliferate. But the reality of it is that I spend about 50% of my time doing promotion, trying to get my work out there, and finding new readers. And there's the web development aspect of it, there's the artwork, and then the writing itself is a big piece. So it's a lot of work, and I'm glad to hear that things are getting out there, because right, that's the goal, right? That's
Yeah, it is
the
the goal to get your name or your words underneath people's eyes,
yeah.
which obviously is attached to your name. And I'm not stalking you or anything. I'm not like typing HG Chambers into Google and trying to figure out where you are. You're just popping up. It's like, whoa, I know that, know that cover. It's pretty interesting to watch that kind of develop. I think last time we talked, we ended up having a really good conversation about marketing, and
Yep.
picking your brain about what you're doing is something I'm very interested in knowing about. I mean, what are the particulars of getting yourself out there? Would you mind sharing it, or is it
Oh
kind
yeah.
of the
Yeah, no
HG
problem.
Chamber secret?
No. No, it's definitely not a secret. And I think I'm doing a pretty good job. There are a lot of people out there that do far more and do it far better, but it's I'm
Or far worse, which I think I'm at the bottom of the totem pole with marketing. I am horrible at it. I am so bad.
well, I don't know about that. I mean, it's one of those things, right? You're putting yourself out there. You're doing these great shows, so I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. But I'm more happy to share, some of the things that I've learned over the past little while. We talked a little bit a moment ago about novellas, and writing a novella in the same universe as your main books, and that's a big one. Having what a lot of people refer to it as a reader magnet, and it's something that you can give away for free to to potential readers in exchange for, say, an email address, and them agreeing to being on your newsletter list. And the newsletter
That's
list is
basically what I remember. It just dawned on me. Emails were very important to you last time. In fact, I think we talked about the process of buying emails too, but that's expensive. You know?
well, yeah. I mean, I would never advise just going out and buying a bulk list of email addresses, because ultimately it's not about numbers, it's about engagement.
Hmm.
You can have 10,000 people on your list, but if only 500 of them open up your emails, you're paying for to have this huge subscriber list that you're
Just
not
wasted a bunch of money. Yeah.
exactly. So there are certain things that you can do to ensure that the people that are picking that you're adding to your newsletter list are engaged. And one of those things is if they are agree to download one of your books in exchange for their email address, you already immediately know that they're interested in your work,
Hmm.
or they're in the genre at the very least. Another technique that some people use in terms of paying it would be Facebook advertising.
Does
So
that work for you? I've heard the opposite. Like that's complete waste.
yeah, it's interesting. I've I used to think that as well, and it but it can be a really valuable tool for getting your work in front of people who are interested in the type of books and genres that you write in. So Facebook has incredibly powerful targeting with their advertising. Like you can target people who read very specific books, or you can broaden it out as well. But you, like, say you write books that would be comparable to like the Hunger Games. You could pick up get a list of people who are enthusiastic about that book, put your ad in front of them, and then encourage them to join your mailing list through that ad in exchange for a download of your novella. So it's
It's
good, really
interesting.
really powerful for targeting. But the downside of that is it costs money to do, right? You're going to pay anywhere from like 20 cents to 30 cents or 50 cents even, depending, per subscriber, and that can get expensive, right? That if you're
Hmm.
paying 30 cents a subscriber and you get 1,000 people to subscribe, then you've just spent $300 to grow your list by 1,000. Which, if you've got the budget for it, then that works out great. But personally, I'm finding that the reader magnet approach works a lot.
Yeah. So let's talk about the reader magnet.
Hmm.
And you're going to specific people who are interested in your type of art.
Hmm.
What are you giving them? Just a free copy of the book or the novella?
Yeah, I've experimented with both. I'm sure you've heard of like Insta Freebie and Book Funnel. They're two websites where you can
I
post
think I've
your
heard of
work and.
BookFunnel. There's
Mhm.
another one too, I think, that I have heard of. I can't remember
Yeah,
the name of it though,
yeah.
which doesn't help this conversation at all if I can't remember it. But
No, no.
no, BookFunnel. Okay.
Yeah, and so it allows you to put an ebook up and allow people to download it in exchange for an email address, or just in exchange for nothing at all if you choose to do that. So people set up giveaways where a whole bunch of different authors will contribute their books or novellas or what have you into a big giveaway, and then everybody promotes it to their newsletter list, and people everybody gets downloads and in exchange for more emails. So it's kind of a really powerful way to access larger audiences of people who are willing to, give you their email address in exchange for being able to download your work for free.
So basically, you say 40, 50% of your time is devoted to getting your stuff out in front of people's eyes.
Yeah, I would say so. And that's everything from updating the website to reworking blurbs, in order to, you know, be more
Yeah, I saw a
appealing.
tweet that you had out the other day when you said you were writing blurbs or you're writing blurbs. It sounds painful, honestly.
Oh,
I mean, all this
worst.
stuff is the worst part about what we want to do. It's
I,
painful.
it can be, yeah, but it's necessary, and it's one of those things where it's it's not my favorite thing to do in the world, but it sure beats, digging
Being
ditches or
invisible. Oh yeah.
yeah, or like sitting at a desk job that I hate, like it's all building something. It's all working towards the end goal, which is, doing this long term successfully and having a successful career as an author.
Garrett Robinson said that it was wearing a different hat. He just
Yeah.
pretended that he was hired to write the advertising for an author named Garrett Robinson. So he would
Yep,
just find the best way to sell Garrett Robinson to Garrett Robinson's readers or whatnot.
that's
What's
good.
your method of going about it in terms of writing the copy, and how do you sit down from word one to being satisfied with what you're going to be sending to people?
Um, it's definitely an iterative process. Like I've probably, and this isn't, necessarily common, but I've probably written something like 30 blurbs for my first book for Recreants, and I've probably read hundreds easily, of, just Amazon bestseller blurbs, and some of them are fantastic and some of them are horrible. I've looked at the structure.
Uh-huh.
What are the different pieces of the blurb?
Interesting.
what makes them effective. Yeah. So
So
that's
you're
kind of,
constantly going back into Amazon and editing what you already have to make it better. You're not being satisfied with what's already there.
yeah. And I mean, part of that has to do with sales, right? Like I just recently started doing Amazon sales, or sorry, Amazon advertising, AMS.
That's what I
And
hear is really profitable. That actually here works very well.
yeah, it can be. But at the same time, it's, you know, there are a lot of factors to it as well. You can target very specifically based on keywords. So if someone is searching for a specific author, you can say, "Oh, I want my ad to show up when in that list of books that appears." Um, and yeah, so that definitely creates more incentive. Is if you're paying for advertising and people are clicking onto the ad, at which point you're charged, right? 20, 30 cents, whatever it may be. And then if it's not converting, if they're not buying the book, then it's not a successful advertisement, right? And maybe they buy after three people, the third person buys it, but maybe not, right? And so if you're watching those numbers and you're paying attention, then you can see where you need to tweak. And ultimately, if someone clicks on an ad, it comes down to the cover and the blurb is what
Yeah,
will.
I was about to say, I mean, that makes those words and your images most important.
Mhm.
And I think we discussed this last time. I mean, your cover's amazing.
Oh,
You said you
thanks.
pull back up your website, and I mean, I know it is nice as well, but I can't remember what I was looking at for your second book. Uh, you you contracted the art out, am I
Yes.
correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I contracted a young man in
Oh, I remember
Georgia.
now. It was what was it? What was the indie website that you used?
Oh, actually, I tried. That might have been beforehand. I tried a couple different other options, but I found this guy on DeviantArt.
Oh
Where
yeah,
I,
DeviantArt is one of my favorite sites. Okay, interesting.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, and the same guy did the second cover. We'll see how it goes for the third.
Vigilance, right?
hmm Yeah, it's a
I'm
little
open.
different of a direction. That's one of the new characters is on the cover for that one.
So the first one had the two characters and the city. That
Right.
drew my attention immediately. That's why I wanted to get a hold of you and talk to you. And I was very pleased that you answered back and were willing to be on the show. But
Mhm.
your cover attracted my attention immediately. Um, yeah, the new cover is interesting too. I can't really see it though. How do I open that up to see the
If you
full
go
cover?
to books, if you go on the website, you go to books.
Oh, Amazon. I'm just going to Amazon and just open it up that
Oh,
way.
I see. Okay, yeah, sure.
So I can't make it bigger.
No.
um, So, man, are you still flying? Or do you fly helicopters still?
It's been a while since my last flight, I'll be honest. Part of the reason for that is the fact that it's just helicopters are insanely expensive to operate. And then the other fact of it has just been keeping busy with so many other things going on.
Hmm.
But I do miss it.
It's a dark cover.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of stuff happening in this book that is not, things are getting bad. Things have gone from bad to worse, and it's all culminating, in this third book. It's all kind of coming together um, in the third story. But that being said, there are bright moments and moments of hope and friendship and um, so it's got a good mix, I would say, a good balance in that
I
terms
like
of
this
that.
though. It definitely speaks of a second act. I mean, the
hmm
worst things can get. Things can only get better from this point in time.
hmm
Like fire in the
Yeah,
background, and
yeah, and that's the last book leaves off with this town of Masada is under siege. It's under attack, and the character on the cover on scene has made a decision to go back and try to fight and try to save it. And so that's her kind of standing in front of it there, as as the as it begins to hit the fan, as they say. But yeah.
so I mean, how going back to marketing,
hmm
and I've talked to a lot of authors recently who have kind of teamed up with other authors, and they're already working within the same genre. And are you experiencing that it works best in a community of people like yourself trying to sell their stories?
I would absolutely say so. I mean, a lot of the things that I've learned through the indie author community, and there's just this such a great group of people out there. Like, and I think it was you mentioned earlier the other author who had mentioned me was I think C.L. Schneider,
Yes,
and
thank you.
she
She is wonderful.
yeah,
Wonderful.
she's a great example of an author who's just totally puts herself out there into the community and is willing to help. And like, I at one point I had asked her about if she knew any good editors, and she gave me this, big, long, well thought out explanation and like these different ideas. And so she's one of those people who is just a great example of how this community is so helpful and just willing to look at this group as a cohesive kind of community as opposed to competitors. So I really
Yeah,
really value that, and I really appreciate that, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
I think she said something that really intimidated me. She goes through a grammatical editor, and
Hmm.
then she goes through a content editor as well. So two
Yep.
specific payments that go out
Hmm.
to people to get her novels where she wants them. But
Yep.
she's also one of those languishers as well. She takes a really long time to produce a work.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? There are authors out there who put out like 6 books a year or even or more in some cases, and you look at NaNoWriMo and the people who partake in that and how they're putting out like 100,000 words in a month, and I can't understand how it would
Well, I
possibly do
wonder
that.
about their quality, right? I mean, I
Yeah,
wonder about what they're actually producing. And then, I mean, one bad novel, nobody's going to come back and look at your second novel, right? I
right.
mean, just makes it
Hmm.
really difficult. You ruin your
Yeah,
reputation, you might as well start a pen name.
yeah,
I think
exactly.
anyway. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, and you can tell that she puts the time into her books too, because the quality is just outstanding. They're fantastic novels, and I think that is one really great way to stand out as an indie author too, is to just put in the time. And sometimes, when you think you're finished a book, you're not. Like for Vigilance, I it took me probably about 2 months after I finished of developmental edits and looking at the structure and moving things around and cutting. Like I think I cut close to 20,000 words from that book, just because the pacing wasn't quite what I needed it to be. And so
my last novel, I had trimmed it so much. Now I have two different novels that
yeah,
I'm working on.
there you go. You double,
Yeah,
it's two
I
for
finished a
one.
novel had nothing to do with the story that I originally wanted to tell.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
huh,
And I've
how'd
got
this happen?
that's something. It's a cool technique actually. It's called a framed story, when you have kind of a story within a story. And there's a little bit of that in Recreance in my first book, where this kind of older, wiser character, Khalil, is telling a story to Oren of this kingdom of Sunmore that existed hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and this battle that took place between that king and his brother, who ends up being the main antagonist of the story. So it's really fun. Like I had, he had his king's guard of gosh, if I can remember, I think there was 11 or 12, no, 13 of them who all had these different abilities and these different characteristics and fighting styles, and so it was really fun to kind of write that story into an existing story and put it into the history, give
It's
it a little bit of
interesting. So you have a character that's telling that story, is how
hmm
you framed it. Mhm.
yep.
There's a author that I had to study in pursuit of my English degree. There's a short story, and it starts out, a letter or something along those lines that talks about these two guys at a bar who are talking to the bartender about a story they heard, and then it goes into the
Meta.
like, oh, this is horrible.
Yeah, yeah, I think if you go too many layers deep, then you just sort of get, you're like,
Started
where
driving me crazy. Who is telling this story? Please
yeah.
let me know. I think you might even put up. I think it was Patrick Rufus is kind of a frame story as well, where
Hmm.
it's a story taking place within a bigger story.
Hmm. Yeah,
The
another
past.
one oh yeah, the you mean the Rothfuss, is it Patrick
Yeah,
Rothfuss?
Rufus
Yeah,
is how you say it. The name of the wind or something along those
yes.
lines.
Hmm.
Love
Yeah.
those books. Wish he'd hurried up with the third one, but
Yeah.
the framing process that he puts in place is really interesting.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it really can add some nice color to a story, I'd say, and as long as it's done right, definitely agree.
What is on your plate going forward? I mean, I know you have a third book coming out. Is it just writing for you, or do you have your eye on a different prize?
It's a bit of a mix. I'm about 12 or 13,000 words into this third book, and I'm probably going to be somewhere around 100 between 100 and 120,000, maybe, depending. I guess it can always go longer. You never really know with these things.
Mhm,
So I'm really focused on that. My goal is to publish this book in July, which might be overly ambitious. We'll see. That depends on how the editing process goes. But like I said, there's been a lot more upfront planning with this book than some of the others. So I'm hoping that that is the developmental edits, anyways, are
do you
smooth.
feel like there's like a pressure behind you pushing you forward to publish quicker than you really might not necessarily want to?
Um, I would say yes, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Ultimately I want my goal is to just get my books out there in front of as many people as possible, and for people to see them and enjoy them, and to help to make this a sustainable career for me. What it comes down to is I sell books, and the more of a catalog you have, the more books you have written, published, and available, the more sustainable it becomes.
Mhm.
So, I ultimately I want to be as prolific as possible, but I I'm not willing to sacrifice the quality or the enjoyment of writing in order to accomplish that. So I'm not someone who uses templates to write. Like, I know there's a lot of YA templates out there for, formulas for success kind of thing, but that's not really my style. I prefer to just kind of come up with things that are exciting and interesting to me and let the stories go where they may. But that having that pressure there, it's a double-edged sword because it definitely is motivating in
Mhm.
helping me to set aggressive timelines and to, you know, turn off the Reddit and turn on the Scrivener and get going on that. So
I'm happy
there's
to hear you say Reddit because that
yeah,
actually is my poison right now.
oh,
Reddit and Twitter.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Twitter's better because at least I can't get downvoted in Twitter.
That's right. Nobody shames you in the comment thread on Twitter.
Yeah. Nobody's like, "Oh, dude, downvote, downvote,
Yeah,
downvote."
maybe some internet shaming for you there.
Where are you on in Reddit? What do you like to play around with there? Or is it just
Um,
marketing for you?
no, I go there for news a lot of the time. I go there for just to kind of keep track of what's happening in the world. As well as, there's some gaming subreddits that are interesting, but
Oh, yeah, man, that brings back the, idea of the gaming lit that you wanted
lit
to get
yeah.
into. I wanted to turn the conversation
Hmm.
in that direction, but we got kinda sidetracked. What kinda games did you wanna write literature for?
Um, so my idea kind of stems from a really old game that I played when I was just a teenager. Um, s- and it was it kind of in the early 90s, so really early in the internet era.
Mhm.
And there was something called MUDs, and which stood for multi-user dimension or something like that. And it's a text-based kind of role-playing game that
God,
where
I
you
wish I'd gotten into that stuff. I didn't
yeah.
have internet or computers in the early '90s at all.
Oh yeah, this is back in the day where your mom lifts up the receiver on the other end of the phone in the house, and all of a sudden the internet's dead because because it was going through the phone lines. You have the old school kind of internet. But so it was a text-based kind of role-playing game where you start out level one and you pick your class, and there is really fascinating because every room has a description. So in a way, it's almost like you're playing a book. You go west and you step into this room, and there's a big long paragraph describing the bustling streets and the rats crawling down toward the sewer and the brick buildings and the shop signs. So it was almost like you're in a literary experience, but you're playing a game at the same time.
Like
And
choose your own adventures type of situation, but a game.
exactly, and there are other people because it was only text based. You could have multiple, a huge group of people all playing in the same world together. And so it was this really elaborate game with all of these different kind of dungeons that you could go to, and like you could call a dragon and just mount it and fly to this place where you could go and kill these monsters, kind of a thing.
Mhm.
And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I have these extremely vivid memories of it. It was all text, but for some reason I could just picture it so perfectly clearly, and I just remember getting so much enjoyment out of it. And to the point where I thought, man, it would be fun to kind of, in a way, go back to that world by bringing it to life in a story. And so I had a really good friend whose name was Ray, who was like with a W, and we would always go on these adventures and have all this fun. And so I thought, it'd be kind of cool have these two characters who exist in this world, and they're living their lives, and they have all these relationships and like challenges and things to overcome, but at the same time they're in a world where they're both just level 1, and then they go to the labyrinth and there's a minotaur and they destroy it, and then they gain these new abilities. So I think that's kind of the RPG element, is that you've got this sort of structured kind of leveling up element to it as well. So I don't know.
Would you level up within the literature itself, or would it be a contrivance of another sort?
I think it would be more interesting to just sort of make it really blunt. And that's part of the lit RPG appeal, is that it's a combination of like the storytelling, but it's also acknowledging that the framework is almost like a
The
role-playing game
ding.
framework, where the guy's like, all right, dude, I just hit level 4 and I got these brand new spells, and let's go test it out. And then like, you know, explodes in his hands, and like, there's could be all kinds of like kind of comedic elements to it as well. I don't necessarily see it as like this big serious epic. It'd be kind of more maybe of like an episodic thing, where these two characters get into trouble and have to find their way out again.
Did you progress with online gaming at all from the MUDs, or is that basically the extent of it?
Um, yeah, here and there. Throughout different periods of my life, I kind of got back into different online games here. Um, like I had a buddy who was really into like Lord of the Rings online, and so I checked that out for a little while, and some friends who were into Warcraft and tried that out for a while. But um, and it was always lots of fun. But man, those things can be a time sink.
Yeah, massively, because you
Yeah.
really do want that ding. You want that next level.
Hmm.
My favorite was EverQuest. That's what really was the beginning for me in like
Oh yeah.
2001 or something like that. Just now, all games are compared to that.
Hmm.
I want
Hmm.
that experience back. And even when I play, it's free to play now. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think part of it is I wanna recreate that experience again, and I want to kind of go back into that world and see what it's like and explore it. And I got so much enjoyment out of it, and that I feel like I would be able to incorporate that in a way that might be to give other people enjoyment as well.
It's
Um,
interesting because I've not heard much about Mud other than old school internet users saying, "Oh, these are really cool games."
mhm,
Be
mhm.
interesting to see which direction you go with that. 'Cause I would
Yeah,
imagine it would be difficult to like kind of set up that world and have people understand what exactly you're trying to achieve with it.
hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of why I look at it as more of an episodic type of thing, as opposed to like, there's this big, huge main antagonist and this protagonist, and it's this epic struggle between good and evil. It would be more of a kind of like you've got these two kind of newbie characters, these two guys who are best friends or become best friends and go out and have these adventures and you know do their best to overcome and become stronger. And like you mentioned, getting that ding of like hitting that level up or getting those new skills, I feel like, if you put the reader into the character's perspective, and the character's experiencing that the reader will also kind of get that feeling and that satisfaction of advancement too. At least that's the idea.
It's fascinating. I talked to another author. Sometimes I get really lucky with people willing to be on the show. And she was one of those, she writes gaming literature a lot.
Oh,
She does, God, I can't remember what games, but she'll write the book for that game itself and
oh,
then
I see. Okay.
kind of building the world up in a literature format. Even World of Warcraft kind of has those books that go along with it, kind of
Hmm.
express the lore of it or whatever.
Right.
Incredibly fascinating
Yeah.
that these games can be multifaceted like that.
Yeah, The Witcher is another one that has a lot of really a lot of books that are doing quite well.
Just talking about that last night, I didn't even know that Witcher was actually a pirated version of the original author's work.
Oh, I
Um,
didn't know that either.
yeah, it was a fascinating conversation. He said that the original Witcher was written as a game behind the Iron Curtain in Poland, and they were stealing the ideas. I wrote it down, but my pad is covered with various colored pencils, and I can't figure out which one of these scribbles is that. So
Fascinating. I did not know that.
no, yeah, fascinating, right? I mean,
Mhm.
things develop from the weirdest places sometimes,
Mhm. Yeah, and there's
and
so much crossover between these different types of media that I think there's a ton of opportunity there for, you know, books to be made into games and vice versa. And like, have you heard of Ready Player One?
oh yeah, it's a
So
great book.
that's going to be a movie. Um,
I'm worried about the movie. Have you read the
are you?
book? Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't, but I've just started actually getting into it and kind of doing some research into it and investigating what it's about. So I've got it on my list.
The book is written in first person, which is not generally one of the things I enjoy in reading. I do not like first person very much, but that sucked me in so much. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. And Steven Spielberg, I believe, is directing Ready Player One. Am I wrong?
Yep. Nope. You're right.
Yeah,
That's right.
it's interesting, but the marketing I've seen is really amping up the 1980s kind of
Oh yeah.
nostalgia
I
elements
hope
of it.
I hope they don't overdo that.
Yeah, I mean, it could be bad, but that's what the book is, right? I mean,
Yeah. Sure.
it's all about that 1980s type situation. I'm
Yeah.
totally excited about it. The book. I highly recommend the book.
Yeah. I think that I'm actually going to move that one up to my next to what I read next. I've been looking for something kind of going back and forth, but now that we're talking about it, I'm gonna move that one up. But yeah, I think that's the kind of that I think is really fascinating. Like I am familiar with what it's about and kind of how it works, and it's that like living inside of a video game kind of thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that's kind of the gist of it is that the characters spend their lives
Uh,
inside these games,
really uh, im- uh,
like virtual
immersive.
reality.
Immersive. Yeah, it's like you're totally immersed into this gaming world, this internet world, basically.
Hmm.
Your body is wrapped in some kind of thing that makes you feel what's happening. It sounds freaking interesting.
Yeah.
It sounds scary in a way too, because technology is kind of going in that direction. And
Hmm.
I wonder what humanity will be like if they can just disappear into a video game that's better than life. And that's
Yeah.
really, it's a dystopian world. I mean, it's really horrible, kind of the way it's set up.
Hmm.
And you play this game and, you don't have to live in that world anymore. I just think that people would die of starvation.
It's possible. I mean, combine that with the universal basic income, and everyone just stays plugged in. No one has to go to work anymore. They can
Yeah, I mean, that's
play.
interesting, right?
uh
That is on the horizon.
Yeah.
And I just
Yeah.
lost a contest writing a story about the basic income thing. Now
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sour on the whole idea. I was like, no, my story was the best. I haven't even been able to read the other ones. Actually, no, that's not true. One person wrote a basic income story based on an ATM machine, and the ATM machine was basically gauging people's reactions when they were taking money out. And every time that it would take money out and the person would cry
Uh-huh.
because he only had a certain amount in the bank account, it would take note. And I think the point was the ATM machine was growing sentience based on the emotionality of the people using ATM machines.
That's
It's
all
an
we needed
interesting
to.
story. I was
Yep.
mad. I'm mad when
And
somebody writes a better story than me.
an AI banker. Sounds
Right? I
dangerous.
mean, it's just very interesting. And thinking about nostalgia, with
Hmm.
Star Wars, it's coming out now, and people are mad. This is not my Star Wars, or this goes against what I thought Star Wars was.
Uh,
People love what they thought they loved, and
yeah,
they do not want people to mess with it at all.
and I think some folks too just they they're not going to be pleased no matter what.
No matter
Like
what, right? This is not
yeah,
Star Wars, and this is not 1978. How come?
right.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks, change.
Yeah, and I mean, like, let's be honest. George Lucas set the bar pretty low with the the
The
three
prequels.
three prequels. So, I mean, compared to that, we're doing all right. I think. It's like,
I think so too. I love the new movies. I mean, The
oh,
Force
yeah.
Awakens wasn't necessarily the best one, but
Hmm.
I mean, these are not the prequels. Thank God.
Right. The Last Jedi, I thought was really well done. I quite enjoyed.
Blew me away. I thought it
Yeah.
was great. And you know what I hate? I saw The Phantom Menace when it first came out, and
Mhm.
I liked it. And then
Oh
I
yeah.
heard that people hated it, and it really impacted.
You started to hate it too.
And I
Hive
couldn't
mind.
help it. Now I can't because Jar Jar Binks is a horrible character. But
Yeah. I will agree that the hate on that movie was probably exacerbated by the fact that you had so many diehard fans who are just like very passionate about their discontent.
Yeah, I was willing to like it, but honestly, Jar Jar Binks did not age well.
No.
Uh, but these trolls are not just stopping at Star Wars, though. They're going after Black Panther now too, trying to
Mm,
marshal bad reviews so it impacts the Rotten Tomato score.
gosh, why would people do that?
I don't know, man.
Probably there's
I
other
think
other
it's
places you
racism.
can.
I think
Yeah.
it's racism. I think it's an absolute 100% racist, sexist attitude against women and any minorities. They
Huh.
want forefront white people,
Yeah.
and they want the woman draped all over the white dude. And if the movie doesn't fit that kind of, cookie cutter situation, then they're mad. They're like,
Yeah.
no, white people are the heroes or whatever.
Uh, yeah.
I, lo-
Times are changing.
yeah, I love
Unfortunately,
that we
because
get different narratives now. We didn't have that
totally.
before. Black exploitation movies were, kind of cult movies. We
Mhm,
didn't get those in the movie theater
mhm. Yeah,
ever.
and I mean, and there's been so much formulaic filmmaking over the past, 10, 20 years, or I guess it goes back even further than that. But it's really nice to see some variety in the type of lead characters you've got, and there are a lot of powerful female roles as well taking center stage in these newer films, and I think that's really a fantastic thing. Glad to
Yeah,
see it
I'm
because
I'm happy about Black Panther. I think it's a great leap forward for minority characters, which you really don't see a lot unless of like the backseat or the comedy relief or whatever.
right. Yeah, I haven't seen it. I'm quite excited to check that one out. So.
I think it's coming out at the end of the month.
Oh, okay, that
I'm
would
not even
explain
a
it then.
comic book person. I don't even know if I want to see it or not, but it's just, it's interesting to me that I read an article right before we got on the podcast that, people are kind of marshaling to ruin its Rotten Tomato score. And it's like, come
Mm-hmm.
on, dude, let the NFL players kneel if they want to,
Yep.
and do not ruin this movie's Rotten Tomato score. Let it live on its own merits.
Hmm. I think that those people they're very loud, but I believe that they're in the minority. So.
I believe it, but they got to. I think they elected our president.
Uh-huh. That's true.
That's the bad thing. And I looked at some
Definitely.
numbers today. A lot of them, have high school educations, and that's basically where they stop.
Hmm.
Like, not saying anything about high school graduates, but they tend not to read very much after they graduate high school.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate, and it's something that we could go down the rabbit hole on this one, but
Yeah,
keep it high level, I guess. And I think
exactly.
ultimately, like
You're
you're
up
right.
in Canada, right? You're in Vancouver.
Vancouver Island, yeah, yeah, and I think it comes down to education, right, and
Mhm.
having those kinds of supports in place, and the more access to education you have, the less bigotry and the less sexism and all
Education
those
kind of
other things.
opens up an empathetic attitude, and it
Hmm.
allows you to see perspectives that aren't necessarily your own.
Totally, critical thinking is another big
Critical
one.
thinking,
Yeah.
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 Well, I mean, again, this is number two. Great conversation. I really enjoyed speaking with you. You know how we end it, I think. I don't know if it was the same when I talked to you or not. I like to finish up with three questions.
Sure.
The first one is basically, man, you're very successful in terms of being able to write two novels and get stuff published under people's eyes. I'm seeing you crop up all over the place. And, basically, if I was somebody that came to you for advice and you had time for one sentence, what would that sentence be
Oh man, one
for that
sentence.
person? Yeah.
That's tough.
And the sentence can only be 10 words long. No, I'm just joking.
Crap. One sentence. Okay.
Now, it can be more than that. I'm just saying, one
Um,
sentence. Give me a
I
paragraph. You could write
going
a
for
whole thesis.
concise ideas here. I get it. I respect that. I would say that make sure that you're always doing what you love. Like ultimately, if you enjoy writing, then keep writing. And yep. Oh, that's more than one sentence, isn't it?
Well, I think I
I'll remember
appreciate
there.
that. Enjoy what you love.
We'll
I
keep
mean,
doing
enjoy
it,
and
right?
do
Like
what you love. I mean, if you're
yes.
doing something that you don't love, try to find a way to do what you love as well.
Hmm.
And oh
Yeah,
man, I keep
and
going
it's
back
work,
to the Garrett
right?
Robinson conversation too, right? He said
Hmm.
if you're going to write something, don't go into romance if you don't read or enjoy romance, because then you'll get
Right.
stuck.
Hmm. Yeah, and it'll be boring, and yeah, I totally agree, and I think that even when you do love it and enjoy it to the most possible level of fulfillment you could get from any kind of creative endeavor, there's still a work element to it. It's not always going to be exactly what we want to do, but just be
Yeah,
persistent.
it's an everyday thing. It's
Hmm.
hours at your desk. It's
Yep.
pounding out words. It's misspelling things and editing and
Yeah.
getting things to fit. I mean, it is hard.
You know what
You
Stephen
have to
King
have a
said?
certain level.
Stephen King says the first million words are just practice.
Really?
That's
I
what he
don't even know
says.
where I don't even know where I am with that. And I have not have kept count, but I
No.
guess it's close to that. Who knows? I'm
Yeah.
probably nowhere close to that. I'm 2 novels in and, hundreds of short stories, so I'm probably
Awesome.
not even close to a million.
Yeah, you should
Um,
put some of those short stories together and put them up on BookFunnel. Send them
I
my
don't
way.
know if that's the way to go or not. My
Yeah.
goal right now is to get stuff into magazines and online
Oh.
in a lot of different places. I've been debating it,
Hmm.
whether or not a collection of short stories would work or not. I'm
Interesting.
even having a hard time with my novels. I have no clue what to do with those either. I'd self-published one, and I'm like, oh, I suck at marketing so bad I couldn't even get any readers on it. So I pulled it off of Amazon to do a rewrite.
Yeah, it's not easy, and it's very. I found that it's also very easy to get discouraged, and like you got to push through those days. I found that there are good days where you get fan mail and people are loving your work, and then there are bad days at the end of a week where you've heard nothing from nobody, and you've been rejected for your BookBub request or like a
But
contest that you
that's
entered.
the one I was thinking about earlier.
Yeah,
I couldn't come up with. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the lack of response is the most painful.
hmm
I mean, I would
yeah,
almost prefer to get nasty comments because at least people are trying to read my stuff, and I can grow off of nasty comments.
hmm
You know what I mean? You need to clean up your grammar, and okay, I'll clean up my grammar. Or
yeah.
your characters, blah blah blah. Okay, that's a good idea. Next time I write a character, I will try to do whatever different.
Yeah. I think ultimately is when you're starting out or when you're not well known, like myself, for example, you got people, you're asking people to take a chance on you, and it's easier to ask them to take a chance with a novella that you're handing them for free than it is saying pay $3 for my book.
Yeah, that's true.
That's in that way, they're not asking them to read 100,000 words or to take a chance on 100,000 words for an author they've never heard of, but you're just saying, hey, here's a short little story. If you enjoy it, check out my other stuff. It's far more
The
effective.
issue though is that you're writing within the same world, whereas I'm writing, standalone novels, which I think
It
kind of
doesn't
hurt.
it doesn't have to be that way. Like, I mean, they say that writing in a series is more effective from a marketing perspective because you kind of, people are more likely to pick up the next book if it's connected to the first one. But I've also heard that if people like your books, it doesn't matter. They're going to look at what else you've written and they're going to buy it.
Well,
So,
I have not written another novella that I want to put up right now. I'm
yeah,
working on my third novel now.
awesome. That's
Yeah,
great.
it's exciting. I love the writing part. I
Yeah.
hate the marketing part. I really do. And I really need to put on that different hat. Oh, now I'm, selling Brian Aiello's novel and
Right. Yeah.
I'm
No,
not
I feel
Brian
you.
Aiello.
I hear you, and I agree. I'm definitely get way more enjoyment out of the writing part of it as well. But
Mhm.
one of those necessary evils, right?
Right. Second
So,
question. What are you
mhm.
reading? What's on your night table? What's in your Kindle? What would you recommend people kind of devour and enjoy? Doesn't have to be books, but video
Mhm.
games or music or whatever.
So I just finished a book by an indie author, Michael Flannery, I think is his name. It's called Battle Mage,
Oh, I've heard of
and
this.
yeah, and it's blowing up on Amazon. The guy's got like close to 900 reviews and like 4.7 or 8 stars, and it's a really interesting, well-written story that fits nicely in the fantasy genre. And it's what I enjoyed so much about it is it just has awesome character development, really interesting, likable characters, set in a world that is maybe not like the most original world that I've ever read about, but it's it's really believable and well written and fun and scary and all these other things, right? It's got a huge mishmash of things from like grand scale battles to political intrigue to a little bit of romance to like individual combat and dragons, all different kinds of stuff. So I highly recommend that book.
Just I finished Kings of the Wild,
Oh yeah.
and really good book. Nicholas Ames, I think is the guy's name, and it wasn't original. You know what I mean? He's writing about centaurs and dragons and giants and all that good stuff, but the way he puts it together is just really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
That's
mean,
that's
you don't have to write original stuff to have it be compelling, I guess is my point.
yeah. No, I think you're right, and it ultimately comes down to the stories of the characters.
How it's written, how you
Yeah.
put it together.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Aristotle said, is there any certain amount of story types of stories that you can tell anyways? I mean, you've got to Just got to work on your prose. What else you got?
Let's see, what was another one that I read recently? Pull up my list here. I highly recommend C.L. Schneider's Nightfire.
Hmm.
It's a
It's
kind
not
of an
standalone though, right? It's in a series.
It's the first book. I
Oh, it is.
believe
Okay.
she's getting ready to publish the second one. It's kind of an urban fantasy story set in a modern day setting, but it has these really interesting fantasy elements, kind of connecting it and this character who comes from this place other than our world. So that
And
one is
not to
was
neglect to mention, she's actually a wonderful person too.
yes, she is. She's awesome. So that's another one I think is a good idea. It would be a good one to check out. Um,
And I guess the third question is, where can we find you on the World Wide Web?
all right,
Where's
that's an easy
HG
one.
Chambers?
hgchambers.com.
Oh,
We'll do it.
perfect.
I'm also on Twitter at HGC Books, as well as Facebook.com/HGC Books.
Well, Mr. Chambers, man, this has been a fantastic conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it again.
As did I.
Please let me know when the third book comes out and we'll have you back on. Or if for that matter, man, you're always invited. Just let me know and we'll get you back on the schedule.
Fantastic. I had a great time. I appreciate it.